I was appointed at the start of the year to be a member of the Anglican Church of Australia's Families and Culture Commission. Now, in case you're wondering what's the Families and Culture Commission, it's the commission which is responsible for helping Anglican churches across Australia to be better equipped to deal with the scourge of family and domestic violence in our communities, but also in the life of our churches. Indeed, we as the Family and Cultures Commission want to help our churches to be safe places for those who are victims and survivors of family and domestic violence. During the week, on Monday and Tuesday, we organised and ran a conference which focused on these issues, and there were people from all over Australia at that conference. Now, there are two reasons why I mention this. One is to assure you that the Anglican Church of Australia is taking these matters very, very seriously and wanting to make sure we're actually doing, looking after people who are victims well, dealing with this situation well. The other reason why I mention it is because I've been thinking about this issue a lot lately. And one of the things that I know to be true when family and domestic violence occurs within church communities is that the perpetrators will often misuse and abuse scriptures as a way of justifying their acts of abuse, or as a way of controlling those that they are actually seeking to abuse. I also know that many victims have chosen to stay in situations where there is violence or abuse because of misunderstandings that they've had about the scriptures that have led them to conclude that they should stay. Now, I don't want to blame the victims because, as we're going to see in a moment, one of the reasons why victims can misunderstand the scriptures is precisely because of the perpetrator and the way in which the perpetrator is misusing and abusing those scriptures. Now, one part of the scriptures which has certainly been misused and abused and misunderstood when it comes to this issue of family and domestic violence is the fifth of the 10 commandments that we're looking at today. Exodus 20 verse 12 has that commandment. It is, honour your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. And what I want to do now is to read to you an excerpt of an article that I came across this week, written by an American woman, where she speaks about her struggles with this fifth commandment in light of the family in which she grew up. So she says, I grew up in a Christian family. We faithfully attended congregations of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church and Presbyterian Church in America. My mum homeschooled us and led children's worship. My dad had a PhD and taught adult Sunday school. In public, he was intelligent and composed. In private, he could go from studying Louis Berkhoff, a theologian, to beating his daughter in a heartbeat. In our family, I was taught to honour my father and mother, forgive others, and not gossip. But homes warped by abuse have their own language. Forgive meant pretend you're happy, even when you're covered in bruises. Honour your father meant obey him, even when you're terrified he might kill you. And we were repeatedly warned not to gossip, which meant telling anyone the truth. This is spiritual abuse, a type of psychological abuse. The abuser takes a godly word or concept and, usually over time and through teaching, warps the meaning. As a result of the abuse I had experienced, when our pastor preached on forgiveness, I thought he was telling me to accept abuse. When the Bible spoke of honouring your parents, I thought God wanted me to pretend my abuser was honourable. But deep in my heart, I knew this couldn't be true. As I matured, I was torn between my desire to please God and my need to escape my father. I agonised over the fifth commandment, honour your father and your mother, and felt like a fake Christian for hating my dad's behaviour. See there how this commandment is misused and abused by perpetrators, and how it causes confusion and misunderstanding for those who are victims of domestic violence and abuse. Now, friends, today I want to make crystal clear to all of you that this commandment, the fifth commandment, is not calling upon people to stay in situations of violence. I want to be very clear that it is not preventing children from reporting their parents to police where parents have perpetrated acts of violence against them. I want to be very, very clear on those things. So before we kind of look at what this command tells us we should do, I just want to focus for a few moments in detail about what it's not telling us to do. Okay? And this brings me to my first point, which is that God places people in authority over us for our good. So in Romans 13, verse 4a, we read, "For the one in authority is God's servant for your good." Now, the context of this is speaking about political authorities, kings, governors, and those sorts of people. And the Apostle Paul makes it clear that Christians are to submit to the authority of these people, indeed even pay taxes to them. Why? Because these people have been put in place by God to be agents of wrath against the wrongdoer. Now, friends, I think this idea of those being in authority given to us for our good isn't just talking about political leaders. I think it extends to families as well, and to the most foundational authority that we have, namely our parents. Indeed, have a look at Ephesians 6 verse 4. "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Do not humiliate them. Do not mistreat them. Do not abuse them in a way that stirs up anger within them. Don't do that. Rather, those with authority in the family home are to use that authority to raise children to know the Lord, to know the goodness of the Lord, to know the goodness of his ways, to know the blessings that come with knowing him. The authority that parents, fathers in particular, have been given is meant to be for the good of the child, and ultimately the best good is to connect them to Jesus. So God gives authority to people for the good of those who are under that authority. And I think that as we think about that fifth commandment, honour your father and mother, it is presuming that mother and father are doing good. Now, Jesus is very clear in Matthew's Gospel, in Matthew 7, that we as parents are not perfect. Indeed, we're evil, he says. But even though we're evil, we still know how to do good by our kids, to give them good gifts. Okay, so it's not assuming that parents are perfect in any way, shape or form, but that parents act for the good of their kids. Now, with that in mind, I also just want to highlight to you some verses from the book of Proverbs, which I think help us to see that you don't have to remain in situations of violence, and that you can actually take action against parents who are violent or abusive towards you. So Proverbs 19 verse 19 to start with, "A hot-tempered person must pay the penalty. Rescue them and you'll have to do it again." Friends, much violence and abuse comes out of hot temper, comes out of anger. And here we are told that unless something is done, unless action is taken, that it will just keep going on and on and on and on. Remember that God has given us police and he has given us courts to be agents of wrath against the wrongdoer. Okay? When we report someone to the police, when we take someone to court, we are using the avenues that God has given us for justice to be done. I don't think, friends, that by reporting a parent to the police that you are breaching the fifth commandment. You're actually doing what they need in order to have the opportunity to see that their behaviour is wrong and that they need to repent. Secondly, Proverbs 22 verse 3, "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Notice the prudency, danger, and take refuge. They don't say, oh, wow, here's a dangerous situation, let's just keep going back. In that article that I read to you before, earlier on, the woman spoke about how her dad had threatened to shoot the family if they dared to leave. This woman very bravely, when her dad was at work, found the gun and made sure it was well hidden. But it can be a very, very tough situation for people caught up in violence and abuse to leave. Indeed, the command, honour your father and mother, could cause people to think, maybe I shouldn't leave. Friends, it is wise to leave such situations of violence and abuse, to get yourself out of there, to keep yourself safe. Please be aware of that. And finally, from Proverbs 22, verses 24 to 25, we read, do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. We've got to be careful of who we associate with, or we might take on their behaviour. And sadly, I know when it comes to family and domestic violence that it can often cycle on through generations unless it is actually stopped. And the way to stop it is to remove yourself from it. So I hope you can see very clearly there that when the Bible says honour your father and mother, again, the assumption is they should be acting for your good. Okay? They should be acting for your good. And if you are in a situation where violence or abuse has been perpetrated against you, it is right to bring the police in, should that be needed. It is right to take refuge and to flee. It is right to disassociate yourself from such behaviour so you are not caught up in it. Now, a couple of final things I just want to say with all of this in mind. If you are in a situation like that at the moment, please feel free to come and disclose that with me. You will be believed. We will seek to help you as best as we can in such circumstances. Again, we want churches to be safe places for those caught up in violence and abuse. And the second thing I want to say is if today has triggered anything for you and you feel the need just to sneak out, that's fine. Okay, don't worry about that. If you want to come and chat with me about it afterwards, that's fine as well. So even after 8:30, I had a couple of chats with people who had experienced family violence and abuse when they were younger, and I'm really glad they chatted to me about that. So if there's any triggering there, feel free to come and chat with me about that as well. But now that we see what honour your father and mother is not saying, let's turn to what it is saying. So what we see is that honouring your father and mother means showing them respect, gratitude, and love. Honour is the word that is used there, and literally it means give weight to. You know how we talk about having a weighty conversation, a weighty discussion? It's really referring to the idea of something that's very important, okay? Very, very important sort of discussion. And so really when it says honour your father and your mother, it's saying treat them with the utmost of importance, okay? Treat them with the utmost of importance. Notice it's honour your father and your mother. It's not just honour your father. Back in Roman times, it was just the fathers who got all of the honour. It's honour your father and your mother. One of the things that came out very clearly in the conference that I was at during the week is that one of the drivers of family and domestic violence is a perception, particularly that women are not as equal as men. Now, friends, the Bible certainly does not teach that. The Bible is very clear that both men and women are created in the image of God. Men and women are saved equally by Jesus. Fathers and mothers are to be honoured. Okay? So let's be very, very clear on that point. But let's just flesh out in some more detail what these ideas of respect and gratitude and love entail. So first of all, respect means acknowledging our parents' position over us. Okay? God puts different authority structures in place. The family is the foundational unit of that. And just as we acknowledge other authorities over us and show appropriate respect, so we are to do so with our parents. Now, there's a few ways in which we can and can't do that. So, first of all, we respect them by not talking down or rudely to them. So I want you to imagine that you are before the King of England. I want you to think about how you will speak if you are before the King of England. My guess is you have been fully briefed by the Royal Office about all of the protocol involved, about what you can and can't say, about how you are to speak, how you're not to speak, and you will probably follow that protocol. Well, friends, very easy to speak rudely to parents, isn't it? To talk down to them. Particularly as your parents get older and they're technologically incapable and you're trying to show them something, it can be very easy to get frustrated and to talk down. Come on, why don't you get this? But no. We are to be patient. We are to be calm. That's how we show respect to them. Okay? Think about how you talk to your parents. That's a key thing. By obeying them if we live under their roof, except, of course, in cases where obedience to them goes against obedience to God. Now, again, we're not to obey them if they're wanting to harm us in some kind of way. Again, they're meant to be acting for our good. And even as you get older, if you're still under the roof, there is an expectation that we should be obeying our parents. Now, as parents, I think too, we've got to take into account that those living under our roof who are older are not the same as what they were when they were younger, and I think we need to show, appropriate respect to our kids in that way too. But if we're under the roof of our parents and they ask us to do something, we should do it, and not begrudgingly, not after the fifth occasion when we're asked, but to do so cheerfully. Okay, to do so cheerfully. Now, once you're no longer under your parents' roof, maybe you've moved out of home or you have started your own family unit, I think the situation changes. I'd still suggest, though, that if your parents tell you to do something, it's probably good to have a very good reason not to, if you choose not to, okay? But finally, we should be willing to listen to them and receive their advice anyway. We live in an ageist society where older people and their experience and wisdom is not valued. We more value, the latest fad, the, younger people, that kind of idea. Friends, we must be willing to listen to those who have come before us. Listen to the experience that they have. Listen to the wisdom that God has enabled them to gain over their years. We show respect by being willing to listen to them rather than telling them that we know everything, okay? And by actually taking on board what it is that they have to say. So we honour our parents as we respect them by acknowledging their position over us in these different ways. Secondly, we're to show gratitude, that is to acknowledge and celebrate all that our parents have done for us. It's our parents who brought us into the world, and for those first few years of our lives, we were totally dependent upon them. We would not have been able to live without them. We must acknowledge that and celebrate that. It is our parents who put up with us as we went through our rebellious phases and still cared for us and loved us and provided for us even during those times. Parents quite often make sacrifices for their kids so that their kids' lives can indeed be better than what theirs were. I think about my parents, and I see a number of decisions that they made trying to do exactly that for me and my sister. And yes, it's great that we have Father's Day and Mother's Day, but that's only one day a year for each parent, isn't it? I think that's not enough. Part of honouring means continually thanking them, showing gratitude to them for all that they have done. Okay? That's part of honouring. And finally, love, proactively and willingly giving our parents time, help and care. I was reading the other day a comment made by some women who worked in an aged care facility, and they estimated that only 15 to 30% of the residents had regular visits from their family. Now, that's certainly not honouring your parents if you don't go and visit in that way, is it? Friends, we need to make sure that we are giving our parents time. In some cases, that can be quite a difficult thing if they live a long, long way away, but of course we have technology at our hands nowadays, don't we? Phones, Zoom, all that sort of stuff, so it is easy to keep in touch with them. Even in my situation where my parents literally live in my backyard, I'll come home, I've had a busy day at work or whatever, and I've got to say, no, go up, spend some time with them. It's not a chore, but again, I've just got to be intentional in doing that. Spending time with them, checking in on how they're going, just having a nice conversation with them. They love it. They absolutely love it. Willingly giving parents help and care. So if we see that they are in need in some way, it is good for us to be proactive in offering help. It's good for us to be active in offering care, especially as they get older. Indeed, listen to 1 Timothy 5, verses 3 to 4. We read, "Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God." Here the Apostle Paul, as he writes to Timothy, says, you're going to have widows in church, and those who have no one to look after them, the church looks after them. For those who have children and grandchildren, well, if those children and grandchildren are Christians, they should be looking after their parents and grandparents. Indeed, verse 8 will talk about those who refuse to do so are worse than unbelievers. Okay? Now, our situation's a little bit different nowadays for elderly parents compared to what was the case in Ephesus. I don't think they had aged care facilities in Ephesus back then. They didn't have my aged care back then. And so how it sort of works out in practice is a bit different. Friends, I don't think having a parent in aged care is necessarily a dishonouring of parents. Depends on their needs, right? And it could be that in some circumstances that an aged care facility is the best place for them to get the care that they need. If you are going to take that path, be very careful though about what aged care they go to. There's one facility that I'm aware of, I wouldn't send my dog to live there, okay, let alone my parents. So if you conclude that that's the path that needs to happen, make sure it's a good place where they will be well looked after, and make sure you visit them regularly when you go there. In our circumstances today too, we've got this great blessing of a thing called My Aged Care packages. My parents, God love them, they're very independent. They hate being helped. We don't want help. So what have they done? With my sister's help, they've arranged these packages where they now have people come in and drive them everywhere and clean their house and do their gutters and all this sort of stuff. So those services are there, and I think part of the care is actually helping our parents plug into those sorts of things so they are getting the help that they need if we aren't in a position necessarily to be able to do it ourselves. So friends, we're in a sense in a very blessed situation now. Like, all our systems could always be better, but compared to what people in other countries have, what we have for those who are elderly is actually quite good. But this command wasn't given to 8-year-olds. It was given to people of all ages. And what obedience to that command looks like can differ depending on our stage. But it certainly entails respect, gratitude, and love. Now, the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 6 also highlights that this is the first command with a promise. The first command with a promise. So it's obviously an important commandment. And this brings us to the next point, which is that honouring our fathers and mothers will lead to the good functioning of society. So notice the promise in the second half of the command, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now, you could read that on the surface and think it's saying that people who honour their father and mother will live to an old age. But I want to suggest to you, friends, there's a lot more to it than just that. A lot more to it than just that. Here's the idea. If you have a society where children are honouring their parents, and where people are honouring authorities generally, and where those authorities are actually doing the right thing by those who are under them, what kind of society do you think you'll have? It'll be an orderly society. It'll be a peaceful society. In such a society, people will actually be able to flourish and indeed probably live longer. Compare that to a society where children do not honour their parents, where people do not obey authorities, where authorities lord it over those that are under them. Well, you end up with a situation of anarchy and chaos. And that's not a society where people flourish. And it's probably not a society where people live long lives. And so what's this saying? This isn't a reward, this promise. It's saying that as you live God's way, good things happen. When you depend upon God's wisdom and put God's commands in practice, life tends to be better. People flourish. People tend to live longer. And so here, the people of Israel are told, if you want to flourish well, if you want to live long lives, the first thing you must get right is honouring your parents. Because chances are, if you're not honouring your parents, you're not going to honour other authorities in the world either. So, honour your father and mother is not about remaining in a violent situation. Honouring your father and mother is not saying that you can't call the police if your parents or parent is being abusive or violent towards you. It's not saying that. But it is saying that God has given us authorities for our good, and so we are to honour them by respecting them, showing them gratitude and showing them love. And as we do so, that will lead to a good society. The final point I want to make, though, is that Jesus is the perfect example of obedience to the fifth commandment. In Luke 2, you might remember that Jesus, aged 12, went down to Jerusalem with the family, as was the custom. And you might remember that all the large family head back to Nazareth, and Jesus was not with them. And after a day, Joseph and Mary go, "Ooh, where's Jesus? He's not with us." Ooh. So they head back to Jerusalem, spend a few days looking around Jerusalem, and finally find him in the temple precinct, sitting with all the scribes and answering questions and blowing everyone away with how wise he was at his age. And then notice what happens. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. And he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. Here we see the priority for Jesus is obeying his Father, but he obeys his parents. It's interesting, isn't it? His parents should have been obeying him. He's God. But notice that Jesus, the one born of woman, born under law, as Galatians tells us, submits to the law of God by obeying his parents and by honouring them, even though he made them. Notice also Jesus' honour of his mother as he hung on the cross. In John 19, verses 25 to 27. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Remember I talked about honouring father and mother involves care as they get older. Here is Jesus hanging on a cross. Here is Jesus undergoing the wrath of God. Here is Jesus undergoing absolute torture. And he sees his mum. And what does he think about? Not how much pain he's going through, but who's going to look after her. And so he says to John, "Look after her." Even as he hung on the cross, there was Jesus honouring his mother. So, friends, Jesus was committed to keeping that command. And, friends, indeed, Jesus kept all the commands. And the reason why Jesus kept all the commands was because his role was to be our sacrifice. And he could not be our sacrifice unless he was perfectly innocent. Indeed, friends, as we think about the sacrifice of Jesus, we see Jesus' commitment to honouring his heavenly Father as well. In John 10:11 and verses 17 to 18, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." Friends, the reason why Jesus came into the world and lived the life we could not live, the reason why he came into the world and died the death that we all deserve to die, was because he was obeying his Father. It wasn't like he was forced into it. He actively obeys his Father. And just as his Father loves us, so Jesus loves us too, and willingly laid down his life for us. But ultimately, he was obeying his Father as he did so. As we look at the obedience of Jesus to his Father, do we not see the profound example of what honouring father and mother looks like? As we see Jesus in his life with his parents, with his mother as he was on the cross, do we not see what obedience to the fifth commandment looks like? And here's the thing, friends, precisely because Jesus laid down his life, well, we can be forgiven for the times when we have all failed to honour our fathers and mothers as we ought. Because the truth is, we have failed. But we also need to be forgiven for those of us who are parents, for the times when we have failed to be good parents to our kids and not treated them the way they deserve. Indeed, friends, here's the thing about the blood of Christ. The blood of Christ cleanses any sin. And so even those who have perpetrated violence and abuse against their kids can be forgiven through Christ if they are genuinely repentant of their sin.